Greetings, everybody, to another episode of the Introspection Hour with Brian and Patrick, where we talk about thoughts, feelings, and emotions associated with everything that life has to throw at us. So, my name is Brian,
And I'm Patrick.
and Patrick. I know there's a couple of things that you and I share in similarities, and one of the most important and profound things that most people can actually go through is actually moving away from their hometown. And I realize that it's because it teaches a lot about who you are as a person, right? Because we've all grew up in the same bubble. You grew up in LA. I grew up in LA. All of our friends and all of our family is essentially Los Angeles. And you were the first person among our group of friends that actually moved away from LA to a different city. And can you kind of tell us a little bit about what it was that, at least in the beginning, pushed you to move away from LA?
Yeah, the main thing for me was just I moved for a job. But even in my job search, I was coming off of 1 year of unemployment. And, halfway through, about 6 months in, I said, man, I'm not finding the jobs I want. This isn't really where I want to go. I need to open myself up. So I took out the geography limitation, right? The location. And then I opened it up, and then DC happened to choose me basically. So when I moved out, it was pretty terrifying. It was exciting, terrifying, and for whatever reason, I don't think I was ever prepared for what happened to me. Right? Not like this big event occurred and like did something profound. What I'm really talking about is what I think everyone feels, which is after you move, you have so many different feelings and things that you never really experienced when you were in your hometown bubble, because your time was filled up with so many things, because there was people you could meet, your best friends were around, your parents were around, your family. I had church. So there's always something going on. But when I moved out, when you're by yourself and you have no one around you, that's a pretty nerve-wracking experience. And that's, like you said a minute ago, Brian, it really challenges who we are, because you have to figure out exactly what type of person you'll be, what type of habits you have. You'll know exactly whether or not you're lazy or it was your parents' fault, that we always say, right? Like when we were living with our parents or our family, it's your fault. I can't be a better person because of you. When you're by yourself, you have no one else to blame but yourself. You don't do the dishes, it's on you. You don't do your laundry, it's on you. That was pretty intense for me in that sense. And there were so many different feelings of fear, excitement, freedom. And then at the same time, I experienced being in the room, an empty room, barely any furniture. And yet my world felt so small, kind of cold. And you're just asking yourself, man, did I make the right decision? Is this the right path for me? You throw it on top of that. I just started a new relationship and was in a long distance relationship. I was in a job where the CEO said, well, we'll try it out. And I'm like, I'm moving cross country for you to try out a whole new type of person in your organization? Okay, that's a risk on both sides. Turns out it worked out really well, and I'm still really good colleagues and friends with that CEO and a lot of the people I met. But those first couple of months, I was like, I have to do really good. And I'll throw in one other layer of stress for me. By the time I got to DC from LA, Brian, I was near the end of any savings I had, any money I had. So I had to live. I was living paycheck to paycheck and paying off credit card, 0% credit card, and at the same time try to just make sure I had enough. But for about a month or two until that first paycheck comes in, money was tight, right? So like I couldn't go out happy hour, maybe one beer. The rest of the time I had to stay inside and not spend any money and not go outside, just so that I had money for rent and utilities and internet, which that was like my initial experience. That just, man, it was intense. It was the best part of my life, but it was also some of the scariest parts of my life, the loneliest. And we're talking over the span of a couple weeks, a couple months. So there was a lot going on. I mean, that's one of the things. But Brian, you came out of our hometown bubble too. So what was your experience like?
So, Patrick, as you know, that I also moved from LA. Actually, the first place that I ended up moving to was actually Ann Arbor, Michigan. And this was because of my ex-girlfriend. She had gone into the University of Michigan program, and as a result, I had the opportunity because of my career. I do home health, I do physical therapy. And physical therapy is so essentially, it's very easy to get a job anywhere in the country. So I'm like, you know what? This is a great opportunity for me to go out and live in a new city, in a new state, in a different part of the country, in a different part of a time zone of all that, right? So I was actually very excited. And also, I know your situation is very different from mine, but my situation was like, hey, we're going back to college, right? You know, as we all grew up in college, we were all broke ass students, had no money, and you know, all the alcohol we got was like cheap Smirnoff. I'm not gonna lie, it was one of the best times of my life since because I didn't really have a good college experience, and then going to University of Michigan, where it was such a small college town, I got a chance to really meet some of Eva's NBA classmates who ended up becoming some of my friends later on because a lot of us played basketball. We ended up playing sports together and just doing a lot of group activities. Just imagine college, but you actually have money to do stuff. That's what it felt like, and that's why it was such a great experience. After moving from LA to Ann Arbor, she had a chance to study abroad for 4 months in Europe. I'm like, you know what? This is a great opportunity, so I'm going to do that too. And that was a different experience in and of itself. And I realized the one thing that's different between you and I, for example, is the fact that I had someone there with me. And that made the transition for moving from city to city, from state to state, much more easier. So after living in Spain for 4 months, we finalized our final trip to moving to Seattle, Washington, where, we did the usual buying a house, doing all of that. Then all of a sudden, I am left with the separation, which we had discussed in our previous podcast. And I am given the choice. Do I move back home where I'm with my friends and I'm with my family? Or do I stay in Seattle where I have, just like you, no friends, no family, just here by myself? And that was actually one of the hardest experiences that I had to go through. And you of all people should attest to this because I called you like every day. I'm like, Patrick, should I go home? What am I doing here? Is it worth it for me to stay here? Really taught me a lot about myself by being by yourself, right? In your case, you were alone in DC, no friends, no family, same situation. And tell us, like, what was that like? Like, what were some of the challenges that you faced while living in DC by yourself?
So, there's a lot with the basic necessities that still challenges a person when you move out and you're by yourself. Whatever way you were brought up, you still have to get into a groove. The biggest thing I would say is that for me, it disrupted my cycle.
What do you mean?
In our hometown, with our family, I knew what I would be doing every day. And I knew I had to do other stuff. Like my time got filled up. So for me, not having more time than I ever thought I needed was actually a bad thing, Brian. Like I was bored. I was lonely because what do I want to do? I want to pick up golf. Okay, but I go to the driving range by myself. Do I want to go to the ball by myself? Nope. Video chat with a girlfriend, text her, that's okay, but person to person, it was like right now, we're in a pandemic. Like, yeah, I didn't meet anyone. I had coworkers, but when you first meet your coworkers, you're not going to be like super tight. You're not going to, unless you meet someone that you just happen to click with, you're not going to like see them every single weekend, right? Like there's only so many happy hours. And at some point you just have to kind of prove you have your own life. So that was really hard. I was like, I don't really have a life. I go to work, I go to church. I went hiking by myself once in like 3 months. So
hey, something wrong with going hiking. I do that all the time, man. It's actually one of the best feelings you could ever do, okay? I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I just didn't want people to get this impression that I tried hiking every 2 weeks or something by myself. It was just like one time that I went. I went to the driving range by myself because that was a solo activity that you could do. And I wasn't like you. I wasn't going out to go play basketball and just, basketball forces you to play with other people. I wasn't really venturing out. I was introverting myself so much during that time Where my previous life, I was more outgoing, I was more social, I was meeting more people. So that had this weird effect on me where it broke me down self confidence wise. So my self confidence during that period went down a lot. If you think about it, 1 year of unemployment, a job that I'm not sure if I'm going to have after a year, moving cross country, my entire support system gone, everyone around me gone, and I really didn't have much to anchor my life. That was the other thing, is that all my anchors were gone, almost all. I would say church saved me. Just having church, the familiar feeling, I can go to any Catholic church and then just keep praying. It still wasn't enough, but it was one anchor that I held on to. So my anchors were gone. And I think it changes you. It challenges who you are. I remember, Brian, in your decision to stay in Seattle or the Seattle, Washington area or not, a lot of, I talked with some of our other friends about your situation, and we were talking, and I remember though, I said, you know what? After having gone through my experience and a couple years in living in DC by myself, I was like, Brian needs to be on his own. He needs to be challenged without a support system of the comfort of our friends. And at that time, if you moved back to SoCal, you would have a close enough circle of friends that you would go back to your old ways. You wouldn't really grow. And I think that's something that's really important, is that I grew out of my experience, and I think you did. Would you say, Brian, you grew, and kind of what that decision, like, tell people and help them understand, like, how hard was that decision for you?
It was, I'm not gonna lie, it was the hardest decision I've ever had to make, because all of my friends are like, dude, you just gotta come back. Like, what? There's nothing there for you. Why are you even there? And kind of like what you were saying, I had a choice, and all of us have a choice, right? My choice was, do I stay and try my hardest to just really figure out what it is that I want to do from here on out? Or, like you said, do I go back to the comfort of home and knowing that I have my stable anchors, kind of like how you were saying? And I thought about that, to be honest. Like, if I go back to LA, what am I going back to? Right? That's the first question I thought about. What am I going back to? What kind of life do I want to have for myself? And I visualized it and I pictured it, and I'm like, if I go back home, by default, I'm just going to be hanging out with the same group of people, and I'm not really going to challenge myself. I'm not going to go out and try to defeat my loneliness, try to meet other people, because let's face it, at a specific age, we get comfortable and we don't really want to venture out to different changes. And we like static, we like stability, right? You're in your 30s, I'm in my 30s, we're no longer in our teens where we're like, hey, let's meet new people, let's go out here, let's do that. It's just like we like stability.
Yeah, and that stability is so critical. And frankly, when you get into your 30s, you don't even want to put the effort to find new friends. It's hard. Finding new friends is just hard anywhere at any time. I were to reflect on even your journey from that point even to now, where you still went through other profound events in your life. You got over that loneliness. You got over that self-doubt. You accomplished it. What I mean also by that, for people that are listening, is we could have probably did some over-unders about how long Brian would last in Seattle before he came back. And that was a little bit of an expectation. And I remember I told you, you can try it out, but know that you're not completely alone and you have a safety net that you could go back to, just to make you feel a little bit more comfortable. But man, you crushed it. You went out there and you found your job, you settled in, you found your groove, you got a lot of things going for you right now. So you pretty much crushed all expectations. You surpassed it, which is awesome, right? I at some point, like, we just need to celebrate that, because as you all have hopefully heard in our previous episodes, there are different moments in our lives where Brian was tested during this time frame. From that point where he decided to stay in Seattle to now, to today, recording this episode. So I think that is something that we should celebrate, right? And
here's the thing. So, like, going back to what you were saying, the only way most of us, you, me, your daughter, everyone, can ever develop into a better human being is to be able to challenge yourself, right? Because let's face it, we're all comfortable with the way we like comfort. Comfort is easy, it's simple, it's safe. But in order for you to really develop and grow as a human being, we have to be able to see essentially what we're made of. I mean, as cliche as that sounds, you have to be able to essentially get pushed down into the ground, smell the mud and realize like what is it that you can physically take. And once you realize that you've experienced your lows of your lows, then you start developing more interpersonal skills and just other skills in general to help you push on through life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And even for me, when I was going through those periods, I had to really reflect on, who I was as a person, really go into my thoughts and deeply and say, is this who I want to be? Is this okay with me? Even I take a lot from a lot of the Catholic monks. They teach about how you have to be aware of the thoughts in your head because they can lead to negative effects, negative consequences. So during that time, I was revisiting a lot of what I had learned and just kind of trying to understand where were my thoughts leading me. And the reason I did that is because the amount of time and the amount of emptiness that I had was such a time frame where I had to really dig deep into myself, right? So for you, there were constantly things changing, and then all of a sudden a big void in your life that had a different way. For me, I was doing that, and at the same time, I was trying to stay positive. And how do you stay positive when your thoughts are leading you elsewhere? Not completely negative, but a little bit of doubt, a little bit of loneliness, a little bit of confidence breaking, and those type of thoughts going through it. So most people, they are like, you need a really bad event, you need to overdose, or you need to like blackout drinking or something like that. No, like when we say you need to be challenged, you just need to be challenged in situations you've never felt before. And they don't have to be some physical altering or, stress induced thing. It could be literally from something good in your life. I found a job after 1 year of unemployment. You were traveling to a lot of different places, and you went through what would be like more of a negative thing, which is you broke up with your ex-girlfriend. But at the same time, like things can come from positive experiences that end up challenging you. So I saw it as that, right? I had to grow from that. It was a positive experience, but why am I thinking and feeling these seemingly innocent but still negative leaning thoughts? And that kind of really made it hard for me, but it also challenged me to grow. And so I was curious, Brian, like you've had a couple of years to reflect, like what other growth have you seen just from that one decision that was, pretty much the hardest decision in your life?
It's funny you bring that up. I do think about this a lot. And unfortunately, I'm going to say because of COVID, I had to put a halt on my growth development, if you want to call it that. Because if you remember from our first or second podcast episode, we talked about loneliness and we talked about depression, right? And one of the biggest defining factors for me was the whole loneliness part. Living in Seattle for like a year, I didn't really have a lot of friends. I didn't really have any real social network or gathering. And I told myself at one point, like, you know what? I'm just going to join a meetup group and just say, I'm just going to completely change my personality and be more extroverted, talking to people and see what I can get from that. And I still remember like that specific day of what happened. And I did what I wanted to do. I started talking to random people. I just had this high energy personality that I was just exuding towards everybody. And it felt great. You know what I mean? I realized, you know what? This is actually not that hard to really do it. It's just a lot of the stuff that we think we cannot do, we limit it because of our own disbelief or self-limiting belief that we can't do it because of things that happened to us in the past, right? Because, for example, in high school, I was considered, I don't use the word loser, but I was essentially like the quiet, loser-like person where I didn't really know what to say. I was shy, I was introverted, and I wanted to really break out of that cycle. And I, in fact, was able to do that because I was by myself, right? When you're put in a situation where you have no other choice, you have no other person to rely on but yourself, again, you have two choices. You could either just stay home and just continue to do what it is you're doing, or two, you could just venture out and say, you know what? I'm going to be someone that I've always wanted to be. And I've always wanted to be a more extroverted and more confident person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's interesting because you went from accepting that, making a decision that you are going to live by yourself, getting through that plus a pretty pretty intense breakup, and then you pick yourself up. After that year, it's kind of like you said, you were living on a high, and then of course, I think a year or so later, like the pandemic hit, and so we are where we are now. But your point about you have to at some point figure out who you are by yourself for yourself. And I think if there's anything that I'm learning from even just both of us sharing this right now, is that challenge individually for all of us can happen for any given reason, good or bad in our lives. It just, you get to a point and you're realizing, I got to decide what I'm going to do. Do I keep doing the same thing? Like you said, do I keep going home and doing the same thing, or do I do something different? Do I change it up? And I think one thing that really drove me to change is I ended up liking DC to a certain point. I kind of liked not being in my SoCal bubble. And then I started seeing more opportunities. So I said this before in a previous episode, but like the echo chamber, when you're by yourself and you're lonely, or you're dealing with just kind of not having a lot of friends or anything like that, you get into an echo chamber inside your head, right? I had to break out of. Then I had to just kind of find hope, I think was the other thing. And like, I've been meaning to ask you, and I was wondering, where are you finding hope? Because for me, I started finding hope in my relationship with my girlfriend. I started finding hope in my career and seeing that there were other opportunities. Again, I came off a pretty good reason to move out of our hometown. But you've had a very different path. So like, where did you find hope in order to break out or even like grow, during this period?
Okay, so my hope in redefining myself before COVID, right, was the fact that I wanted to just, I hate the last straw, as cliche that sounds. I'm like, you know what, I don't want to be that sad, lonely, depressed person anymore. I want to show, particularly myself, that I can do the things that I set myself out to do as long as I actually put in the time and the effort, right? And again, unfortunately, because of COVID, we're no longer able to go out, we're no longer able to socialize, we're no longer able to do essentially anything. And that, obviously, I am blaming COVID because nothing's open, right? You know me, I was going to meetups every week. I was going out and just getting out of my comfort zone to the point where it started becoming more comfortable, because if you continue to practice the things that you want to get better at, such as communicating with strangers, being able to just talk to random people and actually enjoy just being with other people, in a sense where, again, coming from an introverted and shy person where we get scared, I actually started really enjoying the comfort of other people and being like the social butterfly that I was doing in various meetup groups. That was my hope, where like, hey, this is like, that helped me actually, knowing that, look, I went from this shy person to an extrovert, lack of a better word, more confident, I don't use the word extroverted, but a more confident human being. And that gave me the sense that if I could do that, if I could transform myself from being this person and I'm almost all of a sudden I'm here, it gave me the confidence to feel like I could essentially do anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So have you found any hope during this COVID time, or?
It's funny you bring that up, because I tell myself, and I think this is actually very important for all of us, is realizing that this is not forever. I know we've been, it's more, I can't do math, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, 7 to 8 months since we've been in this predicament. And at some point, we do feel like COVID is forever. Like, this is just life. This is normal. But I keep trying to tell myself in the back of my head, like, you know what? This is temporary. The Spanish flu of 1918 lasted 2 years. We'll get through this, and everything should hopefully get back to normal hopefully in under 5 years. I know it's a long time from now, but that's the hope that I give myself, is that this is not forever.
I think what you bring up is a really good point in like, and what was going through my head too, is that when you start living a little bit on a month to month or a day by day basis, you lose sight of this other cliche term, the big picture. And that is another reason why I asked about hope, because for me, and a lot of parents share this, man, those 7 or 8 months so far, Brian, they feel like years. They're dog years to us. and every day feels like a whole nother month has gone by or something like that. It's really long. But for both my wife and I, we changed when we realized, okay, we need to reset. We need to reset our expectations. We understand what this is now, so let's reset our expectations. And I think that really helped us, not so much with hope, but more so with setting expectations lower. No one's going to get a miracle vaccine, and it isn't going to come and all that. It'll come when it comes. So until then, this is where I think we need to find our grit. If there's anything that Americans are known for, it's our grit, the will to continue to keep going, right? And so I've been clinging on to that. I'm like, you know what? That's so true. I can do it. My wife's there. I got my wife. I got my daughter. We can do it. We're going to get through this. People smarter than us are working on the vaccine. People smarter than us are going to do things for the good of the public health. So put a little faith, put a little trust in them is one of the things. But I come back to this message of hope because even in some of my most darkest and some of my most alone and weird thoughts that I had for myself, when you're by yourself, these thoughts can take you in like a million different directions, and it's a rabbit hole. You thought YouTube disruption was bad, like your own mind is worse, right? Like it's crazy where your mind can take you. And the thing that got me out of it was finding hope. And for your point, you just said, I don't want to do this anymore. There's no hope in the current path, so I'm going to look for a new path. I look at all that and I say, wow, look at those growth opportunities. Look at the things we actually accomplished. I see it in a lot of people back in our hometown, not necessarily our direct friends, but other people, the second, third level. And I'm like, man, those people are so sheltered and they're never going to be able to grow outside of that until they get challenged, until they move out. And
that's correct. So sorry to interrupt you. So like we have our one friend, Nabiha, right? Who's lived in LA for most of her life. And the one thing that keeps her there is her family, because she said she's afraid to leave her family. And that's actually a big fear for a lot of people, is knowing that I'm going to leave my friends behind. I'm going to leave my family behind. I'm going to move to a different state, different country, and not know anybody. And that's a big fear for a lot of people. And I think like what you said and what, your story and my story is that it's temporary, right? It's temporary in the sense that, you are going to experience loneliness. You are going to feel a little bit of that negativity of just constantly like, can I do this? Can I do this? But the biggest fear is knowing that, again, you can always go back to your safety net, right? The thing that you actually gain from actually venturing out on your own is being able to learn how to be more independent. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much growth that can happen. And I think everyone should experience it once in their lives. And a lot of people have different reasons why they need to stay in their hometown. And every situation is different. So there's no judgment. There's a lot of empathy that goes into it, because whether it's parents you have to care for, or you have to be nearby, instead of going back and forth, there's a lot of that. But I think what you and I are recognizing is some of the biggest growth that have occurred in our lives is because we moved out of our hometown bubble.
And just to reiterate, by ourselves, actually, well, sort of. Because I know for you went by yourself. For me, I went because of my ex-girlfriend, but I ultimately ended up staying and being by myself. Because I know it's different if a lot of families, let's say, do move cross-country, but they go with their wife and their kids. So they already essentially have their family there with them. It's a different story when you're completely by yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally know what you mean, Brian. It was a profound experience for us. And I think that's why we wanted to, really share and dive deep into what we were going through, what we were thinking, and most importantly, like what got us out of it. And there were different reasons, but if there's one thing I would summarize from your experience, Brian, is that you made a decision for yourself by yourself, right? As much as people had given you advice and all that, you made it for yourself by yourself. I think that's one aspect where people can really latch on to when you go through this, if you are going through it at any point in your life. And for me, it was really getting out of my echo chamber. Once I got out of my head and I looked around, I said, this is actually not that bad. This is pretty good. My life started to change. And so kind of, we wanted to make sure that people, if you have experienced, we'd love to kind of get your comments on what you went through. What was that moment that you said, yeah, this was for me, by me, and just kind of what got you to be able to move to your next stage in life.
I just want to recommend to people, if you guys do ever get a chance to really allow yourself, whether it's through job, through work or whatever, if you have an opportunity to actually move away from your friends and your family into a different state, you'll be surprised on how much you can grow and develop as a human being, and ultimately for the better, actually. Like we said before, it's going to be challenging. You're going to deal with loneliness. You're going to feel with the sense that you're going to deal with loneliness. You're going to have some sense of depression because of that loneliness. But when you get through that, you'll realize you'll come out so much better on top. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, I totally agree with you, Brian. And for all of you, if you have the opportunity to go and by yourself, for yourself, just grab hold of that opportunity if there ever is a chance. And so that's another reason why you should listen to us on the Introspection Hour with Brian and Patrick. And so join us next week for another episode. Thanks, everyone.